Hello, I'm Loren Sederstrom, and I'm the host of the All Around Grant Show. Some of what we've covered on the show. The Great Grant Tractor Parade and the GRP float that has also been in several other parades, as well as some of the greenhouses in Grant, the apple orchards, some of the farm markets in Grant, pick your own blueberry fields, which we have close, some of the farms that are around, car shows that we frequent, as well as the cutter parades and so much more. So join me. Hello, I'm Loren Sederstrom, the host of the All Around Grant Show, and I have my co-host, Diana Longry. We have quite a few things to go over today, a lot of things that are going on, and we're going to be following the last City Council meeting, and had started out with a very interesting proposal. Someone has purchased a 25-acre farm, and they want to turn it into a special needs workshop. So if we could play the first clip, please, we'll talk on the other side.
You can see on this picture up above there, 4 acres of prairie. It's got a house on it, a fairly new pole barn, a fairly large older barn on it, a couple of outbuildings, some woods, and then it's screened fairly well from the neighbors. And there's actually some hills here that don't show up very well, and a berm. So fairly well screened from the neighboring properties.
Is it Tebow?
Here, that is a picture of the property the gentleman purchased. 25 acres, got house, barn, and he has 4 special needs children. And then he wants to expand it to help other children. Now, we're next going to hear from the director of this. He's not going to live on this place. It's going to be leased to the Special Needs Limited Liability Corporation. So if we could hear from the director, play the next clip, please.
It'll still pay taxes and property taxes because we're leasing the property to the charity. Brittany Whittla is the executive director. I might have her talk a little bit about what's going on at the farm.
So a little bit about myself. I'm from central Wisconsin, and I grew up in a rural dairy farming community, so that's always been part of who I am. And then my life's paths have I have a lot of experience working with people with disabilities in various fashions. I'm currently employed at an elementary school that serves the Northeast Metro, and it's all special ed. And then I work for their family with their children and a couple other families. So the goal is I will live on the farm as a caretaker. We won't have any residential people with disabilities living on the farm. It'll just be the caretakers that will be renting from the organization. So the goal is to have probably about 3 full-time employees and then more seasonal employees. Also, we'd love to employ people with disabilities on the farm. So the concept is every day farmers will arrive and they will choose their path and what they're interested in, and they will have agricultural experience will be the majority of the day, and then also opportunities for enrichment. So that'll take place like in the pole barn, so maybe arts and crafts, some time for nature, and then also other experiential learning and enrichment activities. So our vision and I just want to read our mission statement. So 21 Roots Farm is committed to transforming the lives of people impacted by disability through enhancing skills and cultivating independence by incorporating nature and agriculture into their daily lives. So the goal is that people will become experts. People with disabilities will arrive on the farm, they'll pick a path, and they'll be able to just be an expert in that field.
There, that was kind of an interesting concept, a special needs training session. They were wondering if they needed a conditional use permit, and they told that they weren't. So that was that was kind of unusual at first. I've heard of that, and I don't know if you have any input on that.
Well, it certainly seems like it would be a low impact use of the property. So it's still keeping it agricultural, a different type of agricultural to be sure, but certainly for the surrounding neighbors, I think there's not going to be any more noise or pollution generated or other nuisances generated than any other kind of agricultural property would, especially if they have the proper amount of supervision on site for the individuals as they're receiving their training, because farms can be dangerous places as well. And certainly, you having a stables, you know of all the kinds of pitfalls of things that can happen, even when you are very careful.
Well, farming is one of the most dangerous professions. The interesting thing about this is it's not going to be a group home, so they're not going to be there 24/7. So that reduces a great risk of a lot of problems. So from that, it's positive. I think it may be a little bit theoretical, it may be a little rose-colored, but hey.
Did the council have any comments in particular to this proposal?
No, they said, go ahead, you don't need a CUP, you're not doing anything as long as you keep it rural. And they have, they asked about the traffic and they said they're going to be coming on buses, so it's not a problem. But what's interesting is we're then shift gears, and we talked about it last time about the across from the Wildwood School, there's 160 acres that they're developing. Now there's a lot of wetlands there, and they're trying to develop it, and one of the problems is it's on a county road. Well, county has say over how many entrances and exits, and so the county had made some requests, and so this is how the easement language that we're talking about. So if we could play that clip, we'll talk on the other side.
We can change that thing, and I was gonna let her pull that
I've got
up.
it.
Yeah,
good.
So I'd like to hear what that is, I guess. and then
Okay, so the proposed revision to the language in item number 2, condition number 2, is that the applicant shall continue to work with the city and Washington County to determine whether a private driveway access easement through Block 2, Lot 1 to serve the property east is needed, and if so, shall provide a private driveway easement and provide the easement language to the city for review and approval by the city attorney.
Okay, included by reference, because I'm not gonna try to write that down.
They're trying to accommodate the county and their requirements. One of the problems they're having is they're putting all those schools, the high school, junior high in Wildwood, and the tennis courts. Now they're going to be putting in that rink too, that big hockey rink. And it's creating quite a traffic problem. And all of a sudden the county realizes, wait a minute, we're going to have to make major changes. The first time they did a traffic study, when I was on the planning commission, I told them that their traffic study was faulty. So 3 years later, guess what? They have to come up with a plan and change the entrances and exits and put up stoplights. New ball game.
Right,
So,
and the county does have particular requirements too as to how close the driveways can be to each other, particularly because of those traffic concerns. If you have the driveways too close to each other and you've got cars going in and out and they're trying to go cross traffic, it's really a very big mess, and it can be very dangerous. And they also look at whether or not those drives are on curves. They don't like to have driveways on curves because, again, that's a dangerous situation. And so it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds in the future. Now, given the extra development there at the school site and the fact that the initial roadways were developed based upon faulty traffic studies.
yeah, absolutely. And already it's a traffic nightmare because it seems like parents don't want their children to ride buses anymore, so there's a line of cars lined up. And this is a county road, so they do have some jurisdiction over this, and they do in fact have the final say. On major county roads, like this is 12 going east from Matamidi to Stillwater, they have some authority over that. Well, I just thought I'd bring you up to date on that and how they're handling that.
Now, with November's elections, there's vacancies on the Planning Commission because a couple of the Planning Commission members won seats on the City Council. Our clip shows that, well, Loren Sederstrom has put his hat into the ring to be appointed to the Planning Commission, but as you'll see in our clip, Mr. Loren Sederstrom was passed over for a couple of the buddies of the council.
And apply for the planning commission. I'm gonna read off their names just real quick because they put themselves out there and it's not always easy to do that. We have Loren Sederstrom, and please stop me if I say this wrong, sir, Wayne Sarapo, David Tronrud, and Gary Bauman. And those are the 4 applicants that we have up. So unless there's anything else, gentlemen, I will entertain motions at this time.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
would it be appropriate to make single motions or
Yeah, single motions. are
single
fine.
motions?
Yep.
Well, I'm just asking.
No, I think
procedure.
single
So,
motions
okay,
are
that'd be great.
appropriate. You okay with that?
I would
Yep.
make a motion that we nominate David Tronrud to the Planning Commission.
Okay, need a second on that?
I'll second.
Danny has a second. All those in favor of David coming on the planning commission, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Do we have any nays? 5-0, very good. We need one more member. I'll entertain motions on that.
I'd like to, I'd like to make a motion for Gary Bauman to join the planning commission.
And I would second that as well.
All those in favor of Gary Bauman joining the planning commission, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those
Mr. Sederstrom, what's your comments on this, Cliff?
Well, I found it very interesting. I've been on the Planning Commission, I've been the chair of the Planning Commission, I've been on the City Council, I'm well-versed in ordinances, and what they're trying to do is create a yes team, that everybody agrees with the mayor and the deputy mayor, so it's just yes, 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 just like Kiefer and Raj, who just got elected. I only have a couple of the clips, but they're all yes men. Whatever the mayor wants is what they get. So there's no dissent, there's no opposition view. They only show one side of every issue. Now the next big issue, which was quite contentious, is a solar garden. Now, we've talked about this before. There were two places by definition where they could have a solar garden. Now this is quasi-commercial. It's not a commercial one, but it is one owned by a private individual, and they can sell, through a cooperative venture, they can sell the excess to XL Energy. Then they get, if you subscribe, you get a discount in your electric rates.
And so just to be clear, when you say that there's only two places where you could put one of these, you mean in the whole entire city of Grant,
In the
correct?
city of Grant, there have been two areas that meet the criteria. Now, because this was Joyce Wielander's idea, and she did not support Huber and Carr in last elections, they're doing everything tooth and nail to define it. As a matter of fact, they sent her 4 pages of reasons why she couldn't do it. Now, and they're going to bring up, we'll point out later on the faulty reasoning through some of the clips that they're coming up with. They basically twist things around. So if we could play that next clip, please, we'll talk on the other side.
U.S. Solar to amend our zoning ordinance to permit CSES or community solar energy systems within the A1 and A2 zoning districts with a conditional use permit. We did hold a special meeting on January 29th with the purpose of actually having a discussion around the proposed use and the amendment to our ordinances to account for or accommodate such use. So this evening, staff did not prepare a presentation for you since really the discussion on the 29th was quite robust and I believe was actually over 3 hours long. And there was quite a bit of discussion with respect to your reasoning and conclusions and your direction. So based on that discussion, staff prepared the draft resolution that is before you this evening. My apologies that it did get to
They're basically describing, they did have a special 3-hour meeting. It's very interesting. Of course, Joyce Wielander, it's her property and she wants to put it up, and there isn't a chance of a snowball in a pizza oven that they're going to let any of this happen.
And you had mentioned that they then provided her with the reasoning and the rationale that they came up with to deny the application for this. And and I watched the council meeting, and I found it very curious what I saw, and I know that you're going to want to talk about this more, but what I witnessed is not that there was a public hearing being held to take in testimony and evidence and material from the community as to the impact of this application on the community. What I saw occurring is I saw that the mayor and one of the council members, that they were providing testimony as if they were expert witnesses, and then from that testimony and from what they generated themselves, then use that as the rationale for denying the application. And I was thinking to myself, and Mr. Sederstrom, tell me if I'm incorrect in this observation, But it almost appeared to me as if, say you go into a courtroom, and rather than there being testimony from people who are knowledgeable about the case so that you can hear both sides of it, instead, the judge just says, I'm just going to testify as to what the facts are, and then I'm going to make a ruling from my testimony as the judge. That's how it appeared to me, that you had the council, particularly the mayor and a city council member, being the expert witnesses when in fact they're supposed to be the people who are listening and hearing what the community is saying, and from there, that's where they make their findings of fact.
This comes back to transparency, Diana. One of the things they do, they didn't have a hearing at a city council meeting. What they did is any testimony is at the planning commission. That's where the public testimony is. Once again, they do not want transparency. They don't want to show how the sausage is made, so to speak. And so when someone comes to the city council meeting and think they can testify, oh, sorry, you're too late, you can't talk about that. And there was a petition, and again, one of the things that they very craftily do is they twist the facts in this, and we have a number of clips going forward that I can dispel some of these myths, but the next clip we have is David Watts' for USS Solar, and he is making, they did allow him to make a minute and a half statement. So if we could play that clip, we'll talk in the other side.
For US Solar. The council is essentially the only folks in Grant that I've spoken to that oppose community solar, and I cannot figure out why. Our application supports property rights, benefits the community, injures no one, and is supported by 194 signatures on a community-based petition. The council's position has been to deny it whatever the cost. The cost is harming property rights, denying that additional tax revenue for the city, denying local environmental benefits, and ignoring the overwhelming public support. I'd like to enter into the record a link that was emailed to the clerk, Kim, this afternoon, but just would like to make sure that is formally entered into the record. It's the most comprehensive study on property values related to solar farms being nearby or actually directly adjacent. Looked at over 250 solar gardens, and the adjoining uses found no impact to property values. This is in addition to the Chisago County assessor's conclusion that I stated at the special meeting of, again, no impact to property values. This application has been blown out of proportion. This application would bring probably 1 or 2 8-acre community solar gardens into the thousands of acres in the city of Grant. On behalf of Joyce Wielander and the 194 Grant residents who signed the petition, and those that didn't get a chance to but still support this initiative, we encourage you to do the right thing and approve this text amendment application.
There. So he's setting his piece, and of course they're switching things around, saying this is a commercial. Now, this is not a large commercial solar garden. This is a private one that's they're going together with in putting it in. And like I said, by definition, there are only 2 or 3 places in the city of Grant that would allow this to go in. So it isn't now, they allow, if you want solar on your own property, that's a whole different ballgame. You could have the same size of thing on your property. But again, they're splitting hairs. And what's interesting next is I have a number of clips of several of the council members, what they're saying about solar and what the city attorney says about solar. And then I also have when Carl has caught him lying about something about solar. So let's, this is going to be a rare experience, by the way. Denny Kopp actually says something at the meeting. Usually it's, I'll second that. That's all you hear out of him. He never has an opinion, but I was able to glean at least 30 seconds of testimony from this man, and he's been on there over 2 years. So this is a gem. We'll listen carefully.
Okay.
Value the personal use of our acreage, small and large, and as much as I believe solar power generation is viable, when I study the details of our comp plan, I just don't believe it fits. And after our hearing at the work session, that even the possibility of negative impact on property values exists,
thing is, did you notice he had to read that off? He had to have it pre-written out so he could read it. And that kind of says something to the mentality of some of these people.
So, Mr. Sederstrom, the question I have is that he said that he had some data on the impacts on property values. Where did he get that data from?
Probably one of the other realtors. And later on, Huber makes the claim that he spent hundreds of hours researching this, which is kind of a joke. I don't know if we have that in the clip or not. But that was a rare opportunity to actually see Denny Kopp in action. Very interesting. The next one we have is a little bit longer. Tom Carr, who's a real estate agent, as is Huber, so Huber says he is. He rarely ever lists or sell anything, so Lord knows what he does. But we're now going to have the former Mayor Carr and Deputy Mayor Carr is going to be babbling what he thinks about solar, and he's going to, now watch for the spin he's putting on this, and we'll talk on the other side.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing I'm looking at here is that it's about the equipment used in a project that actually makes us want to or not want us to have a use in Grant, because we value our scenic road views. It's in our comp plan. So it's not solar. It's not about solar. It's about solar power and commercial solar power that would be generated and the equipment used to do that. And I think we need to focus on that. I think the council has done a pretty good job of that. The fact that this is a commercial use on a site that is the primary use goes against the ordinances. We have ordinances that don't allow this. That's written. That's something that's real. So that's the other issue. The memo issued by the applicant was trying to make this about solar power, I feel, and it's not. And it was happened again as the applicant spoke again tonight. It's not about a person. It's not about an industry. It's about whether something like this belongs in Grant. And I think we got to keep our eye on the prize, and that's what it is. What the applicant says is also not fact. It's an opinion. I've had the applicant stand up here, I don't know, 3 times now, and they said, it's this, it meets the comp plan. Well, that's an opinion. And they're entitled to their opinion. They're not entitled to facts. And that's an opinion. That's not a fact. And even us, we have opinions, and we have to vote based on opinions of what we think that means. So some things are facts and some things are opinions. Those are opinions that we've heard from the applicant, in my estimation. The difference between solar power and these solar gardens and larger commercial installations is not different for Grant. That came up a couple times, and I don't know for us, it's no different. It's the same thing. So I don't know what the applicant was going with that. These installations, will never be farmland again. They won't be. It'll be deemed commercial site. If they ever tear them down, they'll just put up something else commercial, because that's what will happen. I don't know any business or any farmland around St. Paul that had a building put up on and was torn down and they farmed again. That doesn't happen, and it wouldn't happen here either. If these installations preserve farmland, then a home on the site would preserve it better. We have a 1 acre, an ordinance talks about 1 acre for the driveway, the barn, the garage, all that stuff. So we have lots of sites in Grant where the back part of the property is being farmed. So it still can be farmed, it still can be a homestead, we still get the tax advantages that the school district gets hockey players, and they'll appreciate that now, maybe. So, maybe more, I don't know. And anyway, so that kind of thing. So I think, I don't think saying that this is preserving farmland, so would anything. So I think that's kind of a canard.
The interesting thing about that is he said, if they'll tear it down, it'll go commercial. Well, excuse me, they're not changing the zoning to commercial. So that is another big lie. Once again, he's a realtor, and they twist facts into pretzels. Nothing's black or white. Everything's a different shade of gray, whatever way they want to twist it.
And when I heard him say that phrase, that if that equipment, the panels are removed, that it'll remain commercial, that crossed my mind as well. This is not changing the land use that this property is designated as. They're not changing the land use from agricultural to commercial, are they?
Absolutely not.
And see, and that statement would be correct only if they were taking a vote to change the land designation under the zoning and under the comp plan from agricultural to commercial. And I think that is the biggest
Fallacy.
That's right, and it's also the greatest hook that this solar company, if they chose to sue the city of Grant, that they could actually use that as leverage in a lawsuit, because this is blatantly a false statement that is not correct. And when he talks about the difference between opinion versus fact, he forgot also something else. There's opinions, there are facts, and then there's interpretation. And so when you look at a comprehensive plan, you try to determine what applies, how it applies to various applications. It's not about opinion or necessarily about fact. It is about interpretation. And it is that interpretation and how it's interpreted, according to case law and past precedent, that when you go to court and you litigate that interpretation, one person's difference of interpretation versus another, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about opinions. We're not talking necessarily about facts. We're talking about differences of interpretation, and that's where the legal system comes into play to determine whether or not the applicant is correct in their interpretation versus these cowboys on the City Council of Grant.
What's really interesting, they also have pushed, they said, oh, this is commercial, we can't have that. Excuse me, they passed 2 ordinances. First of all, you can have a restaurant if you're on a county road and you have 20 acres, that's commercial. They did the wedding barn, a recreational event, and they modified the codes for that. They're creating commercial areas all over the city by definition. So you can go, they're saying in A1 and A2, you could have a supper club. Well, the Met Council said we're not supposed to have leapfrog development. So it depends, getting back to the interpretation, it depends on how you're looking at things. And who your friends are. We would have had a supper club in 96 and Manning. They changed the rules for that, but then the gentleman was 62 and he had a brain tumor and he couldn't pass a physical to get the loan. So, and that's still on the books. They can do commercial. I mean, I have 40 acres and I'm on a county road. Gee whiz, what could I have? I could have a massage parlor and a strip club. I'm kidding. I would never endeavor to do that because I farm and it's taken me a lifetime to get out to pursue my dream of farming. But that's an example of what I could have 2 separate entities out there because I have 40-some acres.
And the other thing I want to bring up too that you kind of touched on by saying that there are times where they have changed the ordinances and the zoning to allow agricultural property to become commercial, and that it's a-okay. And yet in this case, they're not. And maybe this case is actually less
intrusive.
Less impact upon the surrounding neighbors. And that brings up a different issue of being arbitrary and capricious in the way they make their decisions, because how can they justify this decision to deny this when in fact there's other examples that they have approved that have greater impact upon the neighborhood and upon the character of the city of Grant as a whole?
Well, something else that's interesting, a judge has already adjudicated that the city of Grant, when it was relating to some horse guidelines, are arbitrary and capricious by going after someone. That's already been adjudicated, so that's a fact. A judge has said, wait a minute, your process is arbitrary and capricious. Now we're going to see the mayor, and he's going to be talking about Solar Garden, giving more opinions. So if we could play that one, please.
Overwhelming support for this. Let me read it to you. Here's what people signed. What we're discussing here tonight is a use table change so that every piece of A1 and A2 zone land in this city would be eligible. Wouldn't have it on there, but it would be eligible for applications, CUP applications, to put these 1 megawatt solar generating facilities, okay? The petition that was circulated is quite a bit different than that. It doesn't say, would you like to rezone Grant or change the use table for approximately 75% of the city? It doesn't say that. It's not what it says. Here's what it says. We, the undersigned, support, urge the the city of Grant to adopt an ordinance to allow for the 8-acre community solar garden on Joyce's Century Farm. So this was passed around with the assurance in the writing of it that they were only, as they signed this, supporting one possible project.
Interesting. You see, he's trying to say that everybody can have a solar garden, when in fact, by definition, there's only 2 or 3 parcels in the whole city. Again, they're twisting the truth, lying through his teeth. Of course, what do bottom-feeding realtors do? Lie through their teeth. And there's a classic example of the dishonesty and deception that this man practices.
And to be clear, those criteria is what limits the number of sites that could be eligible for this, correct?
Absolutely.
And that criteria is based on, I would think, size of the parcel.
Being on a county road, being how far away from residential, those types of things, the screening, et cetera, et cetera. And this would have been very unobtrusive. It already has it would have been backed up to a tree line. And they're coming up, grabbing at straws to come up with every excuse under the sun. The other interesting thing is, too, a number of years ago, a man came in and wanted a 100 by 300 hockey arena, and the mayor, which was Carr, said, "Oh, withdraw your CUP. These horse farmers put up big barns. Build what you want." Well, excuse me, a horse barn is agricultural. A hockey arena, and he wanted to start his own hockey school, is commercial. Again, it depends which way the wind is blowing and who your buddy is, what they want to do. If they find somebody that they want to penalize, by the way, the same, they had sent, when I ran for office 4 or 5 years ago, I had a hay wagon in Mrs. Wielander's pasture with my signs on it, elect, and also vote for the charter. The city attorney, Nick Vivian, at that time, told her that she had to get a conditional use permit because she had an artistic event in her pasture. When state law says political signs of any size and any shape can be allowed from 60 days before the election till 10 days after the election. Once again, this is an example of persecution and people being arbitrary and capricious. We're now going to hear what the attorney has to say about the solar garden. So we'll play that clip.
Mission and the applicant has asked that this be submitted to the council, and so it has been submitted. But I think under the circumstances, the council is free to reach the conclusions it thinks most reasonable, given what it understood at that time, what it studied, and given the dated nature of the information provided today. Second, just housekeeping item, there was some documentation and other materials provided both by the mayor and by Councilmember Carr. And I want to note for the record that that information has been given to the clerk and is made part of the record and incorporated into the record by reference. And that is all I have, and so I'd ask for council action on this.
Carr had a stack of paper 4 or 5 inches high. If these guys worked as hard to sell homes as they did to defeat the concept of a solar garden text amendment, they'd be much wealthier than they are now.
That goes back to my comments earlier in the program where in watching the council meeting for the city of Grant, witnessing the mayor and Councilmember Carr acting as expert witnesses. I mean, at one point, Mayor Huber even said, "Oh, realtors are often expert witnesses," and so he was painting himself even as an expert witness. And so now you have the city attorney not only allowing that practice at the council meeting, which is suspect to start with, I mean, from a legal perspective, but not only is he allowing it, but now he's condoning it and facilitating it by saying, "I just want to make sure and make it clear that all that documentation that the 2 council members presented are part of the record," Well, again, how was that information vetted? Who vetted that information? Did anybody have a chance to look at it in advance so that they could counter that information? How reliable is that information? So you see, there's a lot of issues that I have with the process that was used in this whole entire project.
Oh, I agree with you. They dug up everything they could possibly dig up. They printed whatever they could off the internet. And it's interesting because now we're going to have Carr again, we're going to see him lying about the solar garden. So if we could play that clip, we'll talk on the other side.
Brought up, and I want to make sure we all understand it. The applicants came forward and said, our application solves all your problems. Just pass ours and everything we say that we should do in our application, and you won't have solar everywhere. It'll be fine. You'll only have 3, or you'll have 2, and this and that. We'll only do this acreage. So they were, I don't know, trying to do our job for us. Basically, they came in with the application. They said, just do this, and it'll be okay, and not looking at what we really have to look at, that to truly be arbitrary and capricious would be pass something where very few people could do this, if this is something that we up here at the table think we should do.
Let the people decide. You guys are here for the people. Sir, relax, please.
So anyway,
Please, sir, please.
so if we did that, so that's not our job. That's not how the system works. We come forward here and we, as a city, as a council elected by the people, decide what we should do and what's best for Grant. Not an applicant coming in, telling us how it should be, and that fixes it. So I just want to make sure on the record that we state that just because they came forward, applied for that, if they don't get that text amendment passed, it's not because we didn't look at what they said. It's not because we didn't.
I'm trying to understand what he even said, because he was talking in circles and it made literally no sense. At first it sounded like he said, well, if they would have come forward with just a conditional use permit application, well, then it would have applied only to them and we would have approved it. But then on the other hand, he's saying, well, no, they had to have an amendment because they couldn't really have a CUP. And so you've got this catch-22. Mr. Sederstrom, how can you unpack this for our viewers?
Well, what happened is they knew that she was coming forward with a solar garden. It was made known. And when they passed the original ordinance about solar gardens and solar energy, they twisted it around to close the gate as much as possible because they knew that she was going to be coming forward with it. This has been 2-3 years in the making. So they purposely finagled and connived to be able to say no to this. And when they come forward that there was only 2 or 3 places that they could actually have a solar garden, and realized that she had one of them, then they kept digging to find more things to negate it. And
so in other words, she couldn't have just come to the city with a conditional use permit application.
Well, she could have, but they would have turned it down.
Based on the ordinance.
No, based on their personal grievances, that they're not going to let her do anything.
Right, so why did they need the amendment then? See, that's the point.
The amendment was brought by United States Solar to modify what they originally passed so they would be allowed to have their solar garden. They purposely made it so that no solar gardens could be put in unless you have it on your private house.
I see.
And there is a solar garden in Grand on 105th Street, which is awful large. It's not on the house. It's got to be 80 feet long.
So just to be clear then, it's the amendment that modified the ordinance, and it's the amendment that would have allowed solar gardens, but practically only in 3 areas of the city of Grant. Okay, so I think now it's clear as to what the amendment did, what the original ordinance was, and why she couldn't have brought a conditional use permit to start with in the first place. Okay, good.
Well, we're going to the next one. We're going to hear from the mayor and see how he twists things around about solar gardens. He's talking about Scandia, which is just north
We
of
put in
Grant.
20 megawatts of this, and then last year had a work session and decided, nope, no more. We're all done. We've done our part. They repealed their solar garden resolution and their solar garden rules and replaced them with, lo and behold, almost exactly the same rules that the city of Grant has in order for people to put in residential solar gardens. So apparently Scandia is in on it too. But the point is that we are prepared to take action tonight. We have had 3 public hearings. We've had a 3-hour fact-filled special meeting several days ago, and I think that we are ready to take action, and I would entertain motions on this resolution.
Anybody?
Anyone?
Motion to approve the resolution denying the application for a zoning text amendment.
Do I have a second?
I second.
All those in favor of said resolution, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
What's interesting is the ordinance that Scandia has was for commercial, large-scale solar gardens, not small, intermediate solar gardens. They have several of them up in that direction that are just huge. We're talking acres and acres. And after they saw the first one go in, they decided, well, I guess maybe we don't have one that large. And they evidently ran into some problems. So you're comparing apples to oranges here. It's not the same thing. They had they were allowing commercial solar gardens to go in, large units, when in fact we were going something smaller. So that is, again, twisting the truth once again. It's interesting.
And not allowing that to be discussed and to talk about those differences, about why it was different. They want to only have their version of the story, so there is no opportunity for any public conversation on this.
That's what I've been saying. They're eliminating transparency. Why do you think they do not allow public comment to be aired on the TV? They don't want anyone bringing up anything that they do not want. They want to be in complete control of all input. They also only allow people to talk at the Planning Commission because most people aren't aware that that's the only place you have input. Once again, they're closing the curtains, kind of like, Wizard of Oz, They're moving the little levers back there and it's behind the curtain and, let's hear it for our Wizard of Oz mayor. Okay, we're going to shift gears now. And we've been fighting this, or I've been working against this hockey rink. I have nothing against hockey rinks, don't get me wrong, but where they're placing it is a problem. There is a restrictive covenant on the deed that says nothing shall be built on the 5 or 10 acre municipal waste site, and they're going ahead anyway. Not only that, it was the top of the seal wasn't supposed to be broken, and neither was the bottom. As you know, they use clay to seal dumps. They put it in the bottom, and because it's so impervious that nothing can go through. Well, interestingly enough, about 8 years ago, they literally surcharged it. And what a surcharge is when they dump 10 or 12 feet high of dirt on top of it to put pressure on the ground to squeeze whatever down, to compact everything. So they've been bringing this rink forward, and the problem with that is they're only going to excavate the center, the footing for the rink. And we're going to talk about that. We have a couple more clips, but this is basically the background, some of the issues they're covering with the rink, and the city planner is going to be discussing that. So,
and the location of this is on that
school
property, that school campus that we were talking about earlier in the program, where they've got all the traffic issues.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at the clip.
That is why they are a joint party to the application this evening. We did hold a public hearing, and then it came forward to you at the last meeting. We had a couple council members that were missing as a result of that. You continued the conversation to tonight to make sure that all 5 of you had the opportunity to take a look at it. If you recall, during that discussion, there were some questions that came up that you requested of the applicant. As a result, actually, the applicant went back and provided you with some additional information to answer some of those questions. So that is really the focus of the presentation tonight, which is really that supplemental information that was provided to you. So there, as I noted, there were several items, but there was an event and management
Keep going. Okay.
That's at the end.
There we go. They had a number of things they were going to be talking about, and that they had to iron out. The parking was one of them. They said, oh, we have adequate parking. Well, the only problem with that is it's over at the elementary and at the tennis courts, and people are going to be walking in the dark with no sidewalk alongside the road. So then they had to talk about that, and now they're going to have to put a sidewalk in, and they're going to have special lighting, and it's got to go just down, not up. And so they have all these issues. And there's a lot of issues with this because the school district owns the land. Rink 2 is a private, nonprofit corporation that wants to spend $12 to $14 million to build this, okay? And we have had multiple rinks go belly up. They went bankrupt. And so they're trying to do this. They also are figuring about the traffic, and there's 2 or 3 places for them to come in. They can either come in by the junior high school or by the the entrance for Wildwood, which is by the tennis courts. Well, everybody's going to have to be turning left across a lane of traffic. And they already found from the first traffic study that they had to put up a semaphore and change the traffic just for Wildwood School. Well, now they're going to exacerbate this and make it worse because all these people are going to be bringing their kids in for hockey after school, all times of the day. It's going to basically, and some of these hockey practices go from 5 in the morning till almost midnight. So we're talking about generating an awful lot of traffic without having an appropriate plan. Not only that, they're talking about parking spaces and where are they going to put them, and they come up with another auxiliary parking space for another 70 spaces. Well, it isn't well planned and well thought out.
Now, are they anticipating that users will be those beyond just the Mahtomedi School District?
Oh, absolutely. This is for private. It isn't just for, if this was for high school hockey only, that's one thing. I mean, it's sanctioned by the high school. There's other private hockey, like the Mighty Ducks, for example. As a matter of fact, I heard the Mighty Ducks was giving a grant of $1 million for this. And of course, they've raised $37,000, so what are they, halfway there? Isn't that half of 12 million? But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. They're talking about going forward with this.
And so a question then that I have when you're talking about the use of this facility being, it's going to be used by people outside of the Mahtomedi School District.
Absolutely.
How did they calculate the traffic figures, understanding that it was going to be used by people outside of the Mahtomedi School District, in addition to those who are inside the school district?
A lot of guessing. When Washington County did the study for Wildwood School, they were drastically off. Now this group was offered 10 acres on the south side of that development, the one we talked about earlier in the program. Well, they didn't want to do that, so then they went to the bank couldn't sell the property, so then they engaged with the private developer to develop it so they could get off it because they have 160 acres. The gentleman that was offering to do that, develop that property previously, was the one that put the wild skating rink on top of the old Dayton's building. So he certainly has had a lot of success, but they didn't want to do that. They also brought something forward to add this 160 acres to Mahtomedi, so it would be their problem, and they haven't. That didn't fly.
And you had mentioned that original traffic study with Washington County, that it was flawed, and it would be fascinating to look at that to determine if part of the reason that it was so miscalculated was because potentially that they didn't calculate that the Matamidi school district has such a high ratio of accepting students from other districts?
Well,
Do you know, did they include that calculation when they did their traffic study?
I don't believe they did. They were just conjecturing it. They have, well, it's down to 28% open enrollment. There have been a number of people leaving the district, especially from Wildwood School, because as I understand, 53 parents have taken their children out of Wildwood because they were getting headaches and nosebleeds. And 2 of the teachers have had cancer. Now, I saw one letter in the stack of documentation of a doctor that's saying, oh, the cancer wasn't because of this, it was, you know, well, how can you tell the cause of cancer? You can't. I mean, unless it's smoking, for example, or exposure to radiation.
Or exposure to asbestos.
Asbestos, mesothelioma, that's absolutely true. But the doctor could not, he said it was not the cause. Well, how does he know? He doesn't. It was a shot in the dark. Once again, they're hell-bent to get this hockey arena in. Remember, the Vadnais Heights one failed, and Ramsey County had to buy it. Currently, they're playing, they rent time in Stillwater. They're in a partnership with that. I think, you know, there just isn't enough to go around. I mean, there's more than enough hockey space to go around. It's a very expensive venture because you have to keep that ice cold. I mean, it uses a lot of electricity. It's a high expenditure situation. And that's what happens, you know. And I don't think they're going to have the funding. And what we're going to talk about now is and I've got 2 clips. I should have run them together, but I didn't. About Carr questioning what happens if it goes bankrupt. So he poses some interesting questions. So play the next clip,
Or
please.
where people gone bankrupt. And then what happens then? Now we're past, you know, you build the building.
Right.
No hockey rinks have ever gone bankrupt, have they?
There have been some.
They have been some.
Yep.
Okay, so I was conversing with Mr. Snyder. Mr. Snyder, would you like to make a comment on that, or should I continue? Or
Well, I think if you could fully outline what
fully outline what I'm saying. So
your concern is.
the hockey rink would get built. It would go bankrupt. Is, you know, can you tear the building down? Now, of course, at that time, if you were bankrupt, that probably wouldn't.
Okay, so they're going to put this building up. The interesting thing is, it's going to take an extra $2 million to excavate all the dirt that's underneath this building, haul it to a disposal site, then they have to bring all of this back in and compact it. Now, mind you, the garbage goes down 30 feet. So if you have a 100 by 300 foot building and you're going down 30 feet, you're talking very expensive. And so that's one of the problems.
And I should mention is that if the company goes bankrupt, they're not going to be tearing down the building. The bankruptcy court is not going to say, well, tear down the building. They're going to say, put the property up for sale, because they'll have to sell the property, get whatever they can out of it to pay their creditors. That's the way it works. The building isn't torn down.
Well, that's true, but the problem we have is the school district is leasing the property to this nonprofit. Now, when it comes to bankruptcy, they don't own the land. How can you sell a building that's on land you don't own?
Right. Well,
Isn't there a problem?
You would have, well, it would depend on what that leasing agreement says, because there are many times where a ground lease, which is what this is, they're leasing the ground to put their building on. Oftentimes a ground lease says is that when that company leaves that building stays with the land, and they leave the building behind, and it goes to the entity or the person who owns the ground. So you have to read what that ground lease says, because in the end, it may be going to the school district.
Well, but the question I would then have is, if they file bankruptcy and they owe $10 million, does the bank just lose the $10 million? Who pays the $10 million? what happens? Are they can't repossess the hockey arena and, haul it out of there like you can a used car. Who gets put on the hook
because
for that?
there's no security there.
That's right.
Right. So the way bankruptcy works is that if it's an unsecured debt, that creditor loses out. That's it, plain and simple. They get a big zero.
Let me ask another question. They're talking about selling bonds for this because one of the benefactors that's going to be donating some money is in the business of a financial service where they sell bonds. So he can hype this and sell it. Now what happens? The bondholders would then lose not only their interest, their promise, but they would also lose their principal. Is that correct?
Well, certainly the disclosures that would be available and must be presented to the people buying the bonds must be very clear about what it is that those bonds are investing in, and that there isn't land that's being invested in, that it's a ground lease. So those disclosures in those bonds have to be very clear, and because that could be a risky bond to buy.
Oh, I would agree. Okay, let's play the next clip and we'll talk on the other side. There's another
The issue
bankruptcy
be,
question.
it's on school property. Whose problem is it? The district's. Are we gonna pay, and then what we've heard through the whole process, I'm just saying, is that it's not the taxpayer's problem. Well, if it's the district's problem, it is the taxpayer's problem. So that would be my concern. The other issue is you could do a letter of credit, but that's might be an awful long letter of credit. We're talking about things that aren't gonna happen, right?
Oh, for
But
sure.
if they do, that's what we're here for, is to make sure we have remedies now, because we're prudent and not to wait. So that's my,
Yes, well, sometimes he's prudent, sometimes he's not. Just depends.
Well, yeah, that's true. Well, now we're going to play our last clip, and we'll talk on the other side. It goes back to what we talked about before to show you exactly where this hockey rink is going, and there's a big green spot of the municipal dump area. Then it's going to show where the rink is. Then you're going to see where the sewer and water comes out and hooks in. Once again, I want to reiterate, they put heavy granular sand underneath the sewer line, and that acts as a conduit for plumes and liquids, okay? And Lost Lake's already contaminated with mercury. Okay, now remember I said earlier they surcharge, which means putting 15 feet tall of dirt on top of that municipal dump area to squeeze the stuff down. Well, if they just dig a hole in the middle for that footing, all the stuff from the area around it can ooze in, go into the sewer granular fill, and guess what? We just doubled the pollution. So if we could play that.
The owner of the subject property is the school district, which is 832. The property is located at 8678 75th Street North, or CASA 12, as many know it as. The property is zoned and guided as A1. So point of clarification for folks in the audience, even with the existing school campus there, the property remains zoned and guided A1 and was not rezoned or re-guided as part of the construction of the school site. Portion of the property that would be affected by the proposal is approximately 4 acres, which would be disturbed. The overall site parcel that the ice arena would be located on is approximately 61 acres. The request this evening is to amend an existing conditional use permit. So for those of you that were with us in 2011, we actually had an amendment to a 2006 conditional use permit, which controlled or guided the athletic field construction and expansion. So there's a 2006 permit with various conditions. There was a 2011 permit that then superseded the 2006. And now this evening we are looking at that same permit again.
I guess that's all we have for this time through. Well, I will keep bringing you forward so you get a view of what's happening in the city of Grant. With all these yes men and their lack of transparency, and they're putting the curtain and
Running the levers, and welcome to the Wizard of Oz.
yeah, absolutely. Call him Wizard Hubert instead of the mayor. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Diana.
Yes.
You have excellent commentary, and we'll see you next time, all around Grant.